also. And your question will be, why Carsten? I met Carsten twice in my life. The first time he was on stage, he did not see me. I saw his speech in Milan and in 2017, and I was really impressed. And the second time I met Carsten, it's when I was in Athens, in Greece, a year ago. We have some people who need to mute themselves. So the second time I met Carsten, it's a year ago when I was at the spring conference in Greece. And I was very honored because I was sitting next to Carsten. And I was actually checking what he was doing. And he was taking a lot of notes during the final. So he was listening carefully at the speakers, but he was also taking notes, like I was doing actually. And I started to speak with him and understood that Carsten is an editor, he's a specialist in communication, and he's also a trainer. So that's why I know that Carsten has a lot of knowledge on how to prepare a speech. And I asked Carsten whether he would be keen to give a webinar, to offer this webinar to his district, our district, and to give us some tips. So tonight we are very lucky to have Carsten providing and sharing all his experience on how to prepare a speech. Now, Carsten, the floor is yours. If you want to start.
Yes,
your tips.
I do want to start. Thank you so much, France, for inviting me and everybody for being here. Before we start, I would like to say one thing, which is a sad thing. And that is that last week, many of you will have heard that Thomas Rose, the ex-champion of District 95, died in a car accident. And so I thought I'd mention it now because it's rather fresh news still. And I think some of you on the call will have met Thomas, and I'm sure you will have felt the same thing as I did, that he is one of these many wonderful Toastmasters we have the honor and privilege to meet. And he was a great speaker, but also a very nice person. I remember that he came to our Amsterdam district conference when he was already in the District 95. And he came for a workshop there. He was there with his family, and it was he was a nice person to know. So I thought I'd quickly mention it, and maybe we can just in our minds dedicate our conversation this evening to Thomas Rose. May he rest in peace. So, having said that, let's get started. So this evening, I want to have, as promised, have a look at three things. For this, I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay, hang on. Okay, I'm gonna press play. Okay, so these are the three things that I wanted to have a look at. How do you choose your topic? How do you develop your speech from there? And then what are hallmarks of a good Toastmaster speech? Now, when I say speech, it is contest season now. So obviously I will be referring to contests, but really I've made this to help us maybe prepare a little bit better and faster and easier any speech we make, mostly at Toastmasters, but maybe also elsewhere. And to get us started, I actually want to turn the order around a little bit and start with what are hallmarks of a good Toastmaster speech. And in preparation to this webinar, it was France who pointed out to me the three tips I have to give about hallmarks of a good Toastmaster speech all start with an S. But now, before I tell you the three S's or reveal them, I'm back online now, right? You don't see my PowerPoint anymore.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So before I reveal the three S's, I want to give you an introduction of a speech. So just the introductions, those are just 4 lines, and it is a speech that some of you may have heard. And I know, for example, Colleen, who is on the call, I remember her being touched from the speech, and she was not the only one. It is the speech with which Daniel Mouquet won District 59 in 2016 at the Luxembourg conference. Why do I choose this speech? Well, for two reasons. First, this speech that Daniel gave there is a speech that meant a lot to him. And that's one of the first messages for me this evening in this webinar, that, you know, we can choose a speech because we think it might work well in an international speech contest. My advice would actually be, if you have a topic that's important for you, go with it. And that's what Daniel did. He had a topic that was really important to him, and he went with it, and it worked for him. The second reason that I want to talk about this speech is that Daniel is of my club. And when I joined, he really helped me develop as a speaker. So when he qualified for district and even before, it was my honor to be able to talk with him about his speech. And I was one of the people who helped him a little bit along, I guess. And so in that process, I got to know the speech really well. And it's dear to Daniel, and it's dear to me. So I want to give you the beginning of that speech. And the speech started with Daniel. He had, I've got another one in my hand now. He had a scarf in his hand. And so this is how he started. He said, my grandfather's scarf. Every night he would put it on, walk to the highest point in London, and shoot Germans. That's the beginning of the speech. It's 4 lines and about 20 words. So it's really not much, but I want to talk a little bit about that beginning of a speech because I think it carries a lot of weight. And now, before I reveal my 3 S's that are all linked with this introduction, maybe I can ask you, maybe we can type into the chat box what you think this first few sentences, what this introduction, what it achieves. Okay, so I think I see something coming through here. Where is?
Alors, we can see evocative.
Okay, sets the scene, I see. Henry says middle of the action, simple, immediate, curiosity, connection, punchline. Hey, you know what? You mentioned all the things I wanted to say. I give over to you, back to you. No, I think that's excellent. And I didn't expect that I would be talking about things that you are not aware of. And yeah, I see suspense now. All of that is in there. Frank says framing. Yeah. Maybe we can talk later on what you mean by that. As these answers keep coming in, let me then reveal to you what are the 3 things that I want to highlight in that introduction. Okay, why does this not? Oh, my screen sharing was interrupted.
Yeah, now we see you.
Okay, you see me or the screen?
We see you. Before we were seeing the screen.
Ah, okay. Well, now you're actually supposed to see the screen.
Yeah, and this is coming.
Okay. So I'm going to put the words here, right? You've heard them. You've reacted on them already. Here they are. And now let me tell you what I want to highlight first. The first point I want to highlight about that is what appeared in the comments, is that it's a scene. What is a scene? A scene is something that we can see or that we can potentially see. And it's, in this case, not just a scene of maybe a tree or a still life where nothing happens. It's a scene where somebody does something. So Daniel's father puts on his scarf and walks up the hill. Now, in such a scene, I think it's interesting that we all see things to a certain degree, and we also see them differently. Maybe if you want to share in the chat again what you see, let me tell you what I saw in these few lines. I saw a man putting on a scarf, probably in front of the mirror, next to the house door, and then he opens the door, which is not mentioned, but I kind of saw that, and then I see him walking out of the house and up a hill. That's what I saw. Are there any chat reactions on what you saw? Oh, okay. Stefan sees a foggy night and moonlight. Elizabeth, a hill, walking out of the house, a house. Yeah, the man is outside. So that's interesting that Stefan says a foggy night and moonlight, which is something that I didn't see. And I think this is really interesting that two things here. First of all, we don't need that many words to create a scene. And then the power of such a scene is that we all see it in a different way. And this is something that I woke up to totally when I was invited to speak at the Rome conference in autumn 2017. And I spoke there, and after me spoke somebody else, a guy called Davide Bardi, who is a professional storyteller and who was really magnificent. And he gave us samples of his storytelling, but he also gave us a little bit of theory. And in that theory, he says that when we have such scenes, that we are actually not actors, which is very often, I think, in speaking, like the first maybe comparison frame we might think about. But yeah, when I thought about it, it's completely true, of course, that as an actor, you normally act as somebody and you embody that person. And while Daniel does take his scarf and seems to be his grandfather for a moment, he's really not an acting. And that's what Davide Bardi said, that we are, as speakers, or storytellers, we basically are not actors, but he says we make cinema. And the cinema happens, it's not a film that we make and give you to see. The cinema happens in our head. It happens in your head. You, in such a speech, we start building the scenes. And that, of course, makes much of the engagement. That, you know, we co-create your speech with you, and it becomes a bit our speech because we build it. And so I really woke up to that when Davide Bardi spoke, that as speakers, we have actually different roles. And one role is that we are scene builders. Like Daniel does here at the very beginning, he builds a scene for us to see inside our head. And that's one role of a speaker. Another role of the speaker is when we as a speaker step forward and then I speak with you, the audience, and I converse, maybe by saying, fellow Toastmasters, have you ever asked yourself this question? Or have you ever wondered? So we actually slip out, I think, in and out of these different roles, that I speak with the audience directly as a speaker sometimes, I engage directly, we have a conversation, and in other moments I build these scenes. And I mention it because, yeah, it's very easy to slip in and out of scenes. I think we all build scenes, but I think it's important to be aware of it, that that is one of our jobs. And especially now in the contest season, in Toastmaster contest speeches, well, I don't know, maybe you can put into the chat box what your guess is on how much percent of a speech would normally be within such scenes. Now, I haven't analyzed it, but I would guess at least 50%. Does somebody have, or do a few of you have an opinion here? %, I see Aaron saying. Aaron, by the way, is from District 89 and in Hong Kong. Wow, super. Hello?
It's very late in Hong Kong.
Yeah. So by the way, you haven't seen me all this time, right? I think I didn't need the presentation at that moment. So yeah. So wow, 3:14 a.m. So welcome, Aaron. That's amazing that you make it at that time. So 70%, and I think that's probably quite realistic. So that's the point I wanted to highlight, that when we make speeches, we need to spend a lot of time in these scenes. And they're not difficult to make. If you look at the words that Daniel uses, we can all use them. And we slip into such a scene fast. And I quickly wanted to highlight that these scenes can come in different forms. So when the father walks out, or the grandfather walks out of the door, at the beginning, I saw him in a mirror and putting on the scarf, and that's like a little bit like a close-up with the camera. And then he walks out onto the hill, and then the camera kind of zooms out, and I'm almost in a bird's eye perspective.
Excuse me, can you mute yourself? I don't know if it's Seba or somebody else.
Well, it sounds like we've got a very young listener there.
Yeah, you can go on, Carsten.
So we have these different camera perspectives almost. I mean, we're a bit like cinema directors, like David Abadi says. And then we've got these different zooms and camera perspectives. And so one perspective then is that to be on the hill, the other is closing up on a person. I can say, you know, yesterday I took a walk with my wife in the street. And then maybe you start imagining a street. And so in setting scenes with such simple words, we really don't need to do much. And the power is in having, David Abadi said, I think, in parole banale in Italian, which means, I think, a simple language. And we don't want to over-describe. Because if I now said the grandfather opened the heavy mahogany door and stepped out into the gravel, and as he heard the gravel under his feet, he started thinking, well, those are all details we don't need. And one last thing I wanted to say about scenes, that I think a dialogue with people is also a scene. And you know, I remembered when I first competed at district in the humor speech contest in Budapest in 2014. With me competed, and he won on that day, was Mel Kelly, who had a very funny speech. And he had this moment that is set up, also a scene where, well, the speech is about him being at a rendezvous with a lady, and the rendezvous had its problems. And so at one point, reacting to such a problem, he says, you know, as a mature and responsible adult, I did what a mature and, or I dealt with the problem in a mature and responsible way. I went to my mother. And you know, hopefully that gave you a smile now. It was a big laugh at the moment, but very easily he set up the scene with his mother, no further description, who then says, Mel, don't you see a pattern? And that also is a scene, isn't it? We may start seeing the mother, maybe clear or not so clear, but it's also a scene. And now the last thing I want to highlight about these scenes is that it really, and somebody or some of you, several of you, I think wrote that in the chat earlier, that it starts in the middle of the action, doesn't it? And that is something that is famous in both journalism, in ancient tragedy, you know, or in drama. The old Greeks, they called that in media res, you know, to start in the middle of things. And there's a guy called William Goldman, who some of you may know, or you may know his films. He was the screenwriter of films like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or All the President's Men, and a very famous guy in Washington. And I think it was he who said that you've got to catapult or parachute the viewers right into the middle of the action. And I think that's what Daniel, of course, does, right? There we are, grandfather walks out of the door, up the hill, and shoots Germans. You can't drop somebody much faster into the action. And I think now this is really very much linked to the topic that we set up at the seminar, that how do we build a speech faster and better at the same time? And this is really linked to something that, as my work as a journalist and editor, I've had working under good editors. They sometimes, you write something and then they give you back your text and have struck out the first 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. Because sometimes in writing and in speech writing, it's the same as in real writing, we're just warming up. And there is so much of thinking that we really don't need. And that's certainly a gift that I've been able to give as an editor back to a lot of people, well, journalists, where I could be of a little help. And I've seen that in many speeches as well. The good speeches drop you right into the middle of the action. And so knowing this, that it's good to work with scenes, and it's good to drop people right in the middle of a scene, well, that can save us a lot of work, I think, in making our speech and in starting even to prepare it. So scenes. That was the first thing I wanted to highlight. France, do you think we should take questions at this point, or do I just ramble on?
I think we can go ahead, and you maybe can show us the contrast with paragraph which is very lengthy. I don't know if
okay. Okay, let me do that then. I will share the slide. So this is then the second point.
You need to share your screen again with the slide. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just trying to do that. Okay, so here then, the second element of Daniel's introduction are the simple words, really. Now, I already mentioned that it's not difficult language. And this is something when, with the speech, Daniel qualified, of course, for the World Championships of Public Speaking. And I remember when he came back, he really said that all the speeches there, at that level, all the speeches have, well, several things in common maybe. And one of these things is what he called economy of words. And I think that over time, I really realized that good speeches are very economical with their words. And to underline that, we've heard Daniel's introduction, and when we hear such a good introduction, it seems like, normal, right? Because we don't know it any other way. But I later gave that some thought and said, well, that introduction I could have done very differently. And here, I want to show you, can you read this, of what I maybe could have come up with from the very beginning. There's a window here now that's blocking my text. So can you read this? Let me read it to you. I could have started the speech like this. In World War II, my grandfather was an anti-aircraft gunner. German planes were bombarding the city of London every night, and my grandfather was one of the people who tried to stop them. I still have the scarf. Every night, and so on. Now, of course, we know the real version. Oh, sorry. And there you see what a difference it is, isn't it? And so I brought a few more examples of this. And the next example is something that I'm a bit embarrassed to show you now, because it was the original beginning of the speech with which I went to district the first time in Budapest, as I already mentioned. And that speech was about stereotypes. And an early version of my beginning was this. So it said, today I want to speak about something we all have. I want to speak about our stereotypes. Have you noticed how we feel uncomfortable, not just with the stereotypes of others, but with our own stereotypes? Now, this was supposed to be a humor speech, and I dare say there's no humor in sight even. And I think it was actually, I know, it was Daniel who showed me that I was being much too long there, and in the humor speech, I should be going for a much faster laugh. And so he helped me make that first sentence, or the beginning of the speech, much shorter. Are there any ideas out in the audience, who have not heard that speech, on how one could make that shorter?
Arun or Eres, do you have any idea? Arun say no.
Yeah, so Elizabeth says just the last sentence. Yeah, an example says
maybe
John.
We can cut more.
Yeah, Colleen says I'm a stereotype, and that's the direction it goes to. It's not easy to come up. Once you have a lengthy version, it's actually not so easy to come up with something immediate. It takes time, but it's so important to look at it. So here's what I actually in the end said.
I'm a German trying to make a joke here.
Yeah, well, so that's what I said, stereotypes. Don't we all have them? And then the next sentence was, you may, for example, right now be thinking that a German like me doesn't belong at a humor speaking competition. So, I mean, compare these two versions. The second one is so much more economical, and it allowed me then to bring my first joke home really much faster. Now, we in District 59, which For you outside of Europe, we were District 59 until shortly was half of Europe. And we've been split up into several districts now very shortly. So last year in Athens, John Zimmer won the international speech contest. And he is a master of economy of words. And of course, when you said at the beginning that we were sitting next to each other and taking notes, that is surely, that's surely one of the notes I was taking on how economical he was with his words. So he has, I already showed you the text, his winning speech last year was about aging. It was called 50 Shades of Grey, and it began with him realizing that he had begun to have great hair, and so then he went to the hairdresser to dye his hair, and there he had this thought. And I now made a long version. John Zimmer would never write so long, but I wrote, and I'm sitting there and thinking, today gray hair, and tomorrow wrinkles. Now that's not all too long, but John Zimmer has really a knack of being much shorter than that. Shall I just show you what he said, or do you want to do? Some people want to have a try at this.
I'm sure some people will try to make it shorter. Let's wait just a few seconds. Elizabeth, do you want to try? Anybody?
Yeah, Frank, how could it get any worse? That's much shorter and pretty simple. Gray hair today, tomorrow wrinkles. Yes, that's all getting there. Yeah, Colleen, gray hair today, wrinkles tomorrow. Gray hair tomorrow, no hair. Yeah, and John, and by the way, I think this is typical. John and everybody who's gone so far, they've put a lot of work into their speeches, and probably this doesn't, even not for him, it doesn't come as the first version. I don't know, but this is what he said. Next up, wrinkles. Which means, of course, he had spoken about his gray hair before. And I was sitting there in Athens and I just said, oh my God, I mean, the shortness that he puts into things, that's really amazing. And so let me show you another example of what John Zimmer did. And that is that he also won the evaluation contest, of course. And he evaluated this wonderful speech of Morag's. And it was wonderful for one reason, that she integrated her episode on the open air bus in Athens the day before when it was raining. So in closing his evaluation, he did well with the idea to say, okay, I'm going to recall the situation with the rain and the bus. And here is the longer version that I made of what he could have said. They are announcing rain for tomorrow, so me too, I'm going to get a bus ticket. Shall we have a try again, whether some of you have ideas on how to make that short?
Yeah, we should.
Oh, that's a good one, Oana. Rain tomorrow, take the bus. Yeah, nice and short. Rain, I'll buy a bus ticket anyway. Yeah, that was Colleen, and I think those two would have worked really well as well. And that was, of course, important that he did something short as that, because in an evaluation, you don't have much time, but it's so nice to close the speech that way. Aaron here in Hong Kong, he is still awake at 3 o'clock at night. Rain, go away. Take the bus just for today. Yeah, okay, excellent. So there is some stuff that's as good as John's, I would say. John said, the forecast is rain, I'm getting a ticket. And it was a great ending to that. Now, about this economy of words, I think there's a lot of talk here in Europe. In Canada, probably less, but in Europe, we talk a lot about English mother tongue people at an advantage. And if you look at how often they've won the district championships here in Europe, one would say, yeah, there's a certain ratio that is not 50%, but a good ratio. And they do have a good chance, I guess. They have a kind of advantage, but only if they also use this economy of words. And it's something we can all practice and do. So there you go. That was my second S. So what are hallmarks of a good Toastmaster speech? In this case, the introduction of Daniel. scenes, simple words, and the third element, sorry, did somebody say something? No, okay, then I'll head on with the third element, and that is surprise.
John was right, he put surprise.
Voila, exactly, John, surprise. And I saw some people earlier also said suspense. So this is something that is in Daniel's introduction. He did quite well. It's a bit of a comedic setup almost, isn't it? Because he says, my grandfather walked up to the highest point in London, and walking in me kind of conjured up this image of a walk in the park. And then the next thing he does is shoot Germans. And I remember then that I had to laugh at that moment, and I wasn't the only one. And that was strange. I mean, we know that humor is a lot about surprise. And this also shows how humor or surprise can make us laugh, even when the subject isn't really funny. And I remember when I laughed, I wondered, should I? But in the end, I guess it just shows on how good a surprise it was. Now, I mention this because I think any good speech needs one or a few elements of surprise. And I think it's linked again to this idea of starting a speech or preparing it faster, because if you know that you need elements of surprise, well, then it's good to look for them maybe from the very beginning. And the surprise that Daniel has to say, okay, and shoot Germans, that's a surprise. It certainly does this one thing that the speech needs for us to ask, okay, how is this going to continue? That's surprising. But another way of using surprise can be also in your entire topic. We have here in Belgium a wonderful Toastmaster, Hilary Peden, who's a great Toastmaster because she's a great leader, always helpful and does so many things. And also, she's a very good speaker. And she once told us about the speech that she was preparing about gender equality. Now, gender equality is something we've heard about before, but she had a twist on it. And that was like her true interest, to say that in order to give women more opportunities at work, we've got to give men more opportunities at home. And the moment we heard that, we kind of said, oh wow, that's a new perspective, and it wanted to make us listen. So I think that's important to find the surprising angle for your topic. That's the big thing, or one of the big things that will make us listen. Now, having said that, the scenes that we talked about as well, maybe I can go out of my presentation for a moment. Yep. The scenes that we talked about as well, they also have suspense, right? Or no, not suspense, but they contribute to surprise, because if you have one scene, walks up the hill, shoot Germans, and then the next scene, and then the next, this quick change from one scene to the next also creates surprise, because we're quickly pulled into a different direction that we didn't expect, without it having to be always very surprising. And so this quick change of scenes, that's what I want to come back to and combine with surprise, because that's what Daniel really did well in his speech. So let me quickly tell you how his speech continued. He first had then this moment that his father went to shoot Germans, after which he told us that his father was an anti-aircraft gunner and got better at shooting Germans until one day they shot him. And then he takes us quickly into the next scene, which is in the hospital, where his grandmother sits. And this was the first time that Daniel went out of the role of scene player and talked directly to us and said, and she was only 26 years old. Imagine, that's younger than most of us here today. And so there's his mother sitting in the hospital, and her husband has died. And she says, I can never forget, and I can never forgive. And that's the moment really when he built his theme. And then in the next scene, or that's not so much a scene as this talking with the audience, he says, do you know that? Do you know that there's us against them? So there he established the topic. And from there, he built a few more scenes of, was it dialogue maybe with us a little bit, of telling us that was a lot what he was brought up with, because he heard his grandmother talking, being, well, a little angry still at that all the time, understandably so. And then halfway through the speech, his perspective changes, because he, in the 1990s, went to Dresden, where they were building up Dresden Cathedral, which was bombed by the English. Now, I, as a German, I would never complain about that, but Daniel thought that was not a necessary thing to do. And either way, he wanted to help rebuild that cathedral, and so he went there and participated in that job. And that's when he went out and realized that times have changed, and we, the younger generations, can build a different world. And so then one of the next scenes is that he went to his grandmother and told her about that, and she then said, well, you're right to build a better future. Comes the next scene where there's another element of surprise, where he sits in the office here in Brussels at the European Commission, the European Union institution, and he's sharing this office with a lady called Barbara from Austria. And in one conversation, it turns out that Barbara's grandfather was a fighter pilot on the German side. And the fighter pilots were there to take out the anti-aircraft guns. So those two realized, okay, here we're sitting here today, working for a common future, while our grandfathers, they may have killed each other. But we don't know, but that's a possibility. And so from that moment on, that's his last scene, and from that he then goes into his end and makes this very passionate plea for hello, Judy.
Hello.
And he makes this very passionate plea for, well, being European and not getting back to this us against them. So there you go. I quickly wanted to tell you what his line of development was in his speech. So a lot of scenes bring surprise, and that's what we're there for. We are scene builders. We can do it with simple words. And if we mix it up with a little bit of surprise, we've got a few hallmarks of, I think, a good speech and not just a Toastmaster speech. So now I'm going back to my slides. And we are through with the hallmarks of a good Toastmaster speech. So now I would go to the second part and say, talk a little bit about how do you choose your topic. Mind you, these two pieces or parts now, I will make them definitely much, much shorter than what we've done up to now. But first, maybe shall I ask, is it a moment to take questions, or shall I just go on?
I think in the interest of time, we can go on, and then we can have some Q&A at the end.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. So how do you choose your topic? Percy, a few weeks ago, did a webinar for the Italian division. And that was nice. It was a whole series of webinars, and maybe, Franz, you can share that, or Lillian, you can share the link also with everybody here. And Percy, he talked about choosing a topic. He mentioned two things, that you should be passionate about it and that it should be personal. And, I can't add much more to that, because that's what it's all about, I think. That's what Daniel did. He chose a topic that was important to him. And I would say, if you have something that you feel you could talk about, then take that topic. I think it's a mistake that I've made at the beginning, probably, that I thought, okay, I need a topic that's really good for the international speech contest or for something else. And a lot of people I know go looking for the real topic, the better topic. But the truth is that you take a topic and then you make it better. And that's what I'm going to quickly talk about in point 3 as well. But it's really, at one point, I think you have to start. And I would say, if you have a topic, anything that you'd like to talk about, or had the idea of wanting to talk about, take it and let it surprise you. I think in every topic, there's so much more than maybe we may feel at the beginning. But if you now say, hey, Carsten, that's all very nice, but I really don't have a topic, then there's something that Franz mentioned in the preparation here to the seminar, that one tip, I think, Franz, it was Mark Brown who mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, who said one trick is go through your old photo albums, and look for stories that happened in your life. And that maybe I can top up with workshop that Florian Mück gave in Porto a few years ago, where he went through what many of you will have heard, the storyline. And basically, that's the storyline is go back in your life and look at moments in your life. But he says the best way to find something is take the high moments, like the very best ones in your life, and the very low ones. And I think if you do that, there is something that you can find for sure. But I also have the feeling that we've all got Toastmasters on the call who've been here a little. And then, so how do you choose your topic? Those are two tricks maybe to go about them. And the other one is take your topic and let it surprise you. And now I come then to the third point. How do you develop your speech from there? And now I'm going out of the presentation again. And here I want to talk a little bit about my first experience when I came to district first in Budapest. I already mentioned that. And some of you know that, but not everybody who knew or saw me speak there knew how it actually happened. And that was that I was very lucky at the club contest because I was new at Toastmasters and we didn't have that evening that many participants, but also we were able to send 2 people through. And I made the second place and could still go through to area. Plus, I was very lucky because Martin Jugmans, who a few of you here know, he's an excellent storyteller, but he would have beaten me outright. But he had chosen the wrong topic. It was a blue topic, and it didn't go down well with the judges. So thank you again, Martin, for having catapulted me into the next round. And so what happened after I qualified for area was that Daniel Mouquet, who was president at that time, and Sabine Schönangerer, who was our vice president education, they came up to me and said, Carsten, anybody who qualifies for our club, we should coach them. So they offered to coach me. And so they did. And that's what I learned from that I don't make my speech better alone. If I would have been alone with my speech, it would have been half the speech, a third the speech than it was. It's other people who make us better in our speeches. And I gave that afterwards a lot of thought because I said, okay, I became much better as a Toastmaster because I had this chance to be coached from one contest to the next and was lucky to get on. But what if I would have lost the first round? Well, then I thought, I can still do that, right? Because the magic is not so much about the contest speech, but taking the same speech and working on it again and again and getting other people to help you. So that is what I think we should be doing. We should be developing our speeches with other people who will bring in new ideas, who will tell us what doesn't work and what not, and then our speech changes. And for contests, I actually realized there's also a much better way of going into the contest, because if you go into the contest here at this point, let's say in the club, and then you don't win, well, what if you start preparing before the contest starts? And go to friends' places or fellow Toastmasters and test your speech with them. And that's what I actually did the next year, that I practiced my speech with Daniel and Tom Arden, who I'm sure some of you also know, a wonderful speaker. And I gave them my speech and they thought, wow, your second half is really great, but your first half, you've got to cut that out. And so there I was. Thanks to them, I realized that the first half of my speech was really not any good at all. The only mistake I had made was that I went to them 3 days before the contest, and that was a little bit tight. So from that, I learned again. And that's what I did with the last speech with which I went to district. I just went to Daniel at a very early stage when I just had a few ideas and didn't know how to stitch them together. And one of these ideas was that I felt quite good in Korea at the beach where nobody could swim and I could help somebody get their mattress back. And that became the core episode of my speech. But it was only thanks to early feedback and to ideas of Daniel and discussing about the speech that the speech got better. So that is actually the main tip I want to give today, that a good speech, you don't make it alone, I don't make it alone, and the earlier, even if you have no full speech yet, or just a paragraph, or just an idea, go out to speak with people at an early stage, and let others actually come with ideas as well. you're the president of your speech, but why not make it a collaborative exercise? That's my proposal. So
that's a good punchline. You are the president of your speech.
Yes, and that I didn't invent that. That's a well-known line. I think that's used in the Toastmasters world and beyond.
Okay, great. So, has some people some question for Carsten? Any ideas about next topic for your speech? You want to test with Carsten? Or you have any question about rehearsal? I have one for you, Carsten. You don't get tired to repeat your speech and rehearse and rehearse? You don't get sick of it?
No.
No.
No. I never got sick of it. I never got sick of it because it develops. And, you know, the nice thing, I think, of repeating the same speech is that you get into a new learning dimension. That, you know, if you start a new speech, or if I start a new speech, I have to start from scratch. I have to start with the content. And getting the content right takes a lot of work. And then, you know, it's just the whole process starts again. While where I take the same speech, at one point I can feel really comfortable with the content or with most of the content, and then I can work on the delivery or on my voice, you know, which is something I'm still working on now. Or, well, I'm really starting only with it. But, you know, that having the rest already behind you then allows you to dig deeper and not having to start over again. And that's, I think, why I never got bored with it.
There is a question, at what time do you try to add or not humor in your speech? Is it from the beginning?
No, I think that's a very important one. In a humor speech, yes, then you should have an idea with humor potential, of course, at the start. But in an international speech, and I've been asked that a lot, and I really think don't start to think about humor too early. I would really go for the content at the beginning, find out what your message is. It is true that a bit similar to the surprise element, if you can think of humor at the beginning, already know, okay, the earlier I have it, the better. But normally I find that as your content and your idea develops, humor ideas will almost always pop up.
Thank you. There is another question. Do you learn the speech by heart?
Yes. The contest speeches at the beginning, surely I did. I think also Daniel had learned his speech by heart. I cannot speak for John Zimmer and everybody else, but I do have the feeling that if you go, people who go on in the international speech contest, they almost know their speech by heart. But that also happens that through the repetition, it just sticks.
Yeah, sure.
But some people do it differently. There was, maybe some of you remember the name of the lady, she's, I think, an American who lived at that point, at least in Portugal. And she was in Krakow, I think she was in the finals. And in the semi-final, her speech was quite different than in the final. And I was impressed with that. But she said that's how she does it. You know, she has a few things that she knows the storyline, but she changed the conversations and everything and the dialogues, and it was just different. That was quite impressive.
Mm-hmm. There is a question from Edita who said, can you repeat the same speech over a few years at contest?
Is that, you mean whether that's allowed?
I think so, but yeah, I mean, they say that.
Yeah, I think there are people more knowledgeable about rules, but I think you can do that, yes.
But they also say that it needs to be original, so.
Yeah, but originally yours. You know, you shouldn't be copying. I see Julie Curtis is sitting, and she's a stand-up comedian. And if I was taking her stand-up material and put a lot of that into my speech, that wouldn't be allowed. But if it's my material, yes. And something comes to mind. I think it was Craig Valentine, who's a wonderful speaker, I think, and he was world champion before they took videos. I never saw his speech, but I think he said that when he became world champion, he took the speech from the last year and just put it on steroids, that he just made a much better version of that. So that seemingly is possible.
Thomas asked how to make a speech alive from paper to the audience.
Ah, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Thomas, is that Thomas Verwaard? I think, yeah, I would say you already know that. But what I would say is that that's why these scenes are so valuable and jumping right into the middle of the action. That it happens to people that, yeah, Thomas writes, yes, it's me. It happens to a lot of people, and mostly inexperienced Toastmasters, that they sit down and write on a speech, but then they don't write anymore as they would speak, and then your language becomes stylized and not natural anymore. So I think from the beginning, I would really write my speech just as I would say it. And actually that also begs the question, you know, linked with learning your text. At the beginning, I wouldn't even, or I normally don't write. That's not the first thing I do. I actually find myself here in this room, maybe having a few ideas, and I already talk a few sentences as if I had an audience. That's how I start with speeches, and that I think has helped me not to slip, at least not too much, into language that's not natural speaking.
I also remember John Zimmer saying that we should not publish a speech on, for instance, LinkedIn, because it's not an article as such, and a true speech is not written with written language. It's more oral.
Yeah, it's like you would speak, right? And
Exactly.
That's different. Mind you, I mean, I give writing trainings, and there, what I always say is, you know, we should write as we speak. That's, I think, the biggest secret to good immediate writing. But of course, there are differences, and John is right, of course. You know, if you share a speech in written, it's hard to imagine on how it would actually be delivered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody who is going to compete in this audience?
Yeah, so Aaron is competing in division now already. Super. Congratulations.
What was your topic, Aaron?
That's already good, huh? Okay, here's an interesting question I see. How do you make sure that you still have the audience with you when you jump fast from scene to scene? Well, that's a good question. Well, it should all fit together, shouldn't it? It should be the logical next scene. It's maybe surprising, but it should be the next logical scene in the sense that that we don't wonder, oh, but what's happening now? I don't really understand. So what are we doing?
How long? Yeah, no, I understood what you said, because there is some glue between the scene, and it's logical. Beate asked, how long do you plan your speech? 5 minutes?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. That's something that Daniel also came back with from the World Championships, that he said, you know, his realization is that a good championship speech, and it's actually somebody else who said that, should be a 4-minute speech stretched out over 7 minutes. So I think this, yeah, what Beate says, 5 minutes, that's not bad. You know, I can say from my last speech in Milan, I made that speech very short in terms of words. And my speech, it had like not more than 650 words or so, which felt great.
How many words did you say?
650.
Okay.
650. And that felt so good because I had all the time in the world. You know, I knew if something happened, I could explain. I'm being interrupted. My daughter's here. Say hello, Anna.
Hello.
Okay, yeah. So, what is the word? Good enough. Well, she wanted to have a good night kiss, so
Oh, nice.
that's fully in order, I
You
guess.
made it simple words.
Yes, yes. So, I had less than 650 words, I think, and it was so wonderful because anything could happen, and I knew I could deal with it. I knew I would just be in time, and then you can just expand so much. So yeah, thanks for that question. I think that's really important to make the speech actually make it a 4 or 5 minute speech.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there any other question?
Can I maybe add one thing? Because I rushed a little bit through point 3. But that is really important to me that we've done this now more and more. And when I say we, it's Daniel and a group of different people. We have very often met on Sunday evenings, and then different people from the club or even outside the club came along, and then we did what we call trio coaching, or sometimes 3 or 4 people, and somebody would give their speech or an idea for a speech, and just talking together with several people through a speech, it's the value is so amazing. That's what I've really come to understand, that when we develop a speech together with other people, we make the speech so much better, so much faster than we could never do alone. And that also relates to an experience that I have, from my journalistic work, that when you interview people and have a very normal conversation, that it's very often in these very normal conversations that you ask, but what did you want to say here, or what's important to you here, that then the gold comes out in those situations. And it's actually a good idea to have a recorder with you at that moment and record what people say then, because that's often the true speaking and the real stuff that comes out. And Marcena Gavenda of our Brussels club, who did a lot of theater, she said, we could call that the hot chair. And we're calling that the hot chair now because it's something that comes from theater, where somebody who takes on a role is put into a chair and is then being asked a lot of questions and has to answer these questions as if he or she was the person now she or he is enacting. Now that's in theater, but we find that really, if you just have a conversation and ask questions to the speaker, that's when everything comes out, or not everything, but a lot.
Can you repeat that for us, because it's very valuable? You are saying that when you want to rehearse a speech, you have some people in front of you, and then after having given your speech, you would go on a hot chair, and they will ask you question about it and how you feel.
Yeah, well, that with how you feel is not so necessary. It can be part of it, yes. What we took away is just this concept of hot chair, of having somebody in this chair and the others asking you about your speech.
Okay.
And that can be all kind of different questions, but very often it is, so here at this point, what are you trying to say? Or why is the speech important to you? Questions like these very often then bring out the true heart of things.
Okay. Great. Very good idea. What was Daniel's speech title?
Who remembers? I think he changed it when he went with it to the World Championships.
If you don't remember, we can share John Zimmer's speech title. You remember? It was 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey, yeah. And by the way, I can look this up. Daniel has gotten his 3rd child in December, and he's busy for understandable reasons. That's why I didn't even ask him now. I think there must be a recording of his speech somewhere. Maybe we can share that at some point.
Okay, we can, yes.
Yeah.
So any final remarks from anybody? Patricia, do you want to speak?
Patricia, do you want to speak? Is that a no or?
I think people are very much appreciative of your time and all the tips you provided. There are many comments to say, vielen Dank, thank you, merci.
Yeah, I've seen some of the
Great,
comments.
wonderful. So that's really good.
That's really nice.
I'm very glad that so many people joined. They recognize the value of it, and we had also good publicity from Frank Kaiser on Facebook. So I will thank him again. He could not join us because he has flu or some kind of.
Oh, okay, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me say, you know, I think this was a typical Toastmasters experience, so international. People, many people I know, but many people I don't know. Aaron in Hong Kong is getting up here in the middle of the night for this. Craig from Canada.
Fantastic.
Sorry?
It was fantastic.
Oh, that radio voice. Yeah. No, really, it was a joy to do this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. So next webinar will be next month on the 21st of March about emotional intelligence with Ruby from Switzerland. She's also a Toastmaster. So I encourage you to attend, and you will get further information on Facebook.
France,
21st of March.
France, yes, because this is a sharing webinar with District 59 and your district. Our next webinar, actually, we'll have two coming up next Sunday. One is with Mark Snow regarding everything you want to know with pathways in the morning. And in the afternoon, we have how to harvest in meetings. So how to record your meetings and do great visual just with your smartphone, with one of our Luxembourg members who will be presenting how he does great videos just with his smartphone for free. So that is District 59 webinar. So please follow us on Facebook and keep updated. So looking forward to see you, all of you as well in our webinars. Bye.
Thank you, Elena.
See you guys
I wish
again.
everybody a very good evening, and we speak soon. Thank you. Thank you, Carsten.
Thank you. Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Ciao, Betexia.
Ciao, ciao.
Good night.
Thank you, Carsten. Fantastic work. Great.
Thanks.
Gute Nacht.
Thanks. Yeah, good night. Thanks for listening.
Auf Wiedersehen,
Bye.
Carsten.
Auf Wiedersehen, Frank.
Bye, Carsten.
So would the recording be uploaded on the District 59 or no?
Great. When they give the recording, we will put it on our YouTube and link on the event page. But I can send to you by message then after if you want. So.
Yep.
So some of us are still on the call.
I still have a meeting in 1 hour, so it should be fine.
Okay, I'll be logging out then. Thanks, everybody. See you
Okay,
next
Carsten.
time.
See you.